Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming today. We're going to begin in just a minute. Excited to have Tim here with me. We're going to let people get. We used to call it dialed in, but people, checking in, getting online here, and we'll begin in a second. And let me just start. As we let people get on here, is that the format of these events are always the same. I'll introduce our guest. What I love about these events is that they're a drill down on a single topic with a single expert, and so we get to really kind of drill down on things in a much deeper way than you often get to do. And as somebody who spent many years going on cable news, where you had entire segments for 4 minutes, being able to spend 40 minutes with a expert is really just, I think, a wonderful thing we can do here for you. Tim is going to speak for 8 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to have time for questions in all the ways that we all know how we take questions in Zoom world. And I want to thank all of you for coming. We're going to begin. Hey folks, this is Simon Rosenberg from NDN. Welcome to our regular talk series that we do about American politics. This week we have a really good friend joining us for what I think is going to be a terrific discussion. Tim Durigan, who runs the DNC's Countering Disinformation operation, is going to be speaking to us with his thoughts about the state of play in this sort of new part of American politics. Tim did data analytics out of college, and in 2018, we were part of a team that created really the first countering disinformation operation in a major party committee for the DCCC in the 2018 cycle. Tim then joined the DNC and has built their program up over the last several years. He really is one of the leading experts. He's a great guy, also a great colleague. We had a terrific time working together. And I'm really excited to bring him here today and let him share some of his thoughts. These issues have obviously been very front and center in our politics in recent days. And so it's a very timely a moment for us to address this incredibly difficult challenge of countering disinformation in our politics, and also more broadly in civil society. It's not limited to politics, but also more broadly in civil society. So Tim, thank you for being here. Let me turn it over to you. And I know you have a presentation, and you can turn that on whenever you want.
Great. Well, appreciate the invitation, and thanks for everybody being here. I'll just go for a couple of minutes, talk through our program, what we do here at the DNC to push back, limit the reach of mis and disinformation, and I'll open it up for questions. So I'm gonna share my screen really quick because I do have a deck. Just give me 1 second to get that going. Cool. So just to set the stage, and I think this audience probably has a good sense of this already, but the online ecosystem, the way folks are getting information is changing. It's been changing for a while. It continues to change. Increasingly, social media is a major source of news and information for the American people, for American voters. There's a graphic on the left there from a Pew Research study. It found that 36% of Americans are getting news on a regular basis from Facebook. Overall, social media is about 2/3 of Americans are getting at least some of their news on social media. And you can see on the right there, this is just a snapshot of last month. The top publishers on Facebook are there on the right. I've color-coded them in a way that I think you all might understand. Hard right news sources, or I shouldn't call them news sources, hard right propaganda sources are dominating on Facebook. Again, that's the largest social media site where people are getting their news and information. Us in the political world, we tend to focus on Twitter, which I think is an important place for activists and journalists and folks. But swing voters, rank and file, they're spending more time on Facebook, places like YouTube and Instagram. And this is just a sample of kind of what that news environment looks like. Daily Wire is an aggregator site run by Ben Shapiro. They take news reported by other outlets and they put hard right spin on it. And they pump that into Facebook, which is designed to amplify that type of emotive sensational content. So this is kind of the world that we're living in, and it's a dark one for the time being. We're hopeful that things will move in the right direction in the future. So I want to talk quickly about our program here at the DNC. We're organized around 4 pillars.
Hey, Tim,
Go
can
ahead.
I interrupt for 1 second? Can you just talk up a little bit? We've just gotten a request that you talk up just a little
Sure
bit.
thing. I'm just going to hold the mic in front of my face. I apologize for the awkwardness there. But our program here at the DNC focuses on 4 main what we call pillars, goals. The first is around threat detection or social listening. Understanding what's being said about Democrats and Democratic candidates, what mis and disinformation is moving around online, especially. The second piece is kind of what we can do about that, how we fight back. The third is around education. And so this is not a fight that we can take on our own as the DNC or even as an entire, political party. And so education, both in terms of public awareness, but also making sure our campaigns are equipped to take on this and disinformation where it appears and affects their races. The last piece is around policy and specifically social media company policy. These folks really hold all the cards. And so part of our approach has been to really advocate for reform at some of these companies. So just to go quickly through kind of each of these pillars, we have a number of technical tools we use to understand what's being said on the internet, where disinformation comes from, how it moves across the ecosystem, and what the specific narratives are. We have a team of researchers who do this. We provide reporting to Democratic candidates and our state parties, our sister committees, along with suggestions. I think one thing that's important in the political context is a lot of campaigns don't really know what to do about mis and disinformation. They can tend to kind of overreact or be paralyzed by it. And so one of the things that we really prioritize is making sure that we're providing suggestions along with reports of, hey, really bad things are happening. Make sure they're not paralyzed or getting distracted from what they really need to be doing, which is, raising money, turning out their voters, persuading voters, trying to win elections. What can we do about it? There's a couple of things. The easiest thing is where we do see manipulation on social media. We work with social media companies to have them enforce their terms of service. So social media companies have terms of service. They don't enforce them very well. So part of what we do is kind of spot this type of manipulation and bring it to their attention, especially in the case of foreign actors, like is pictured on the screen here. When we see, these are folks in places like Pakistan and Albania, not necessarily politically motivated. These are folks who are trying to make money online and have found out that, disinformation, misinformation, right-wing propaganda gets a lot of clicks and makes them a lot of money. And so when we can spot these folks and get them to the attention of some of the social media companies, they can take action. Fortunately, a lot of this behavior has been reduced. This was a big chunk of the behavior around the 2016 election was just fake news, places like Macedonia producing this stuff. Fortunately, a lot of that has been removed, though we do see some of it. Where the kind of mis and disinformation threat has moved is towards domestic disinformation. Republican Party, a lot of officials, obviously the former president, major sources of disinformation. They've employed disinformation as more of a political strategy. And so, our operations here at the DNC have kind of shifted focus along with the threat. And so, we've been moving towards monitoring mis and disinformation domestically. There's less that we can do with the social media companies on that front. And so kind of the second piece of our countermeasures is really building out a megaphone and an apparatus to push back on these lies and this propaganda coming out of the right. And so we do that with, partnerships, surrogates, our own social media channels, making sure we're building a grassroots organization that's not just active, on the phones and on the doors, but also active on social media. The third piece I mentioned before is education. We do a training series for all of our partners. We have a playbook available to left-leaning organizations, and a public resources portal up on our website there at democrats.org/disinfo. Again, the thinking here is, this is not a challenge that the DNC can take on alone. It's going to require public resiliency, journalists to understand how these things work, social media companies to take more responsibility for what they're publishing, many different actors, rising to the challenge. And so with that in mind, we've created that public resources portal. The last piece I mentioned was shifting the terrain. How can we advocate for reform at these social media companies that are publishing and amplifying, mis and disinformation propaganda? And so what we've seen is, broad public advocacy, not necessarily on behalf of, as a part of the DNC, but as a broad ecosystem, has produced some changes at the margins. There's still a lot more to go. But the reason why we focus on this is because so much of the power is in the hands of these companies. There's only so much that we can do from a messaging standpoint to push back on this when these companies are so powerful in amplifying a lot of this mis and disinformation. A couple examples of the initiatives that we've done. The one on the left is on our website. This is a scorecard we've used to evaluate different social media companies, encourage them to look around at their peers and see what they're doing to address this problem, and adopt, successful strategies that their peers have put into place. The second on the right there is an initiative that happened during the Biden campaign in 2020, really focused on Facebook, which again is where a lot of Americans are getting information. So I'll close with this, just a couple of things that you all can do. I think the public can do to really address this epidemic, so to speak. One is supporting quality journalism, progressive media, especially. We saw all of those hard right sources really dominating these spaces. Folks on the left have not invested as much in building progressive media. Taking on social media companies again with that broad pressure. I think a second piece of this is obviously Fox, who's a major source of mis and disinformation and propaganda on cable. They also have a large social media presence, and then investing in year-round organizing as a political operation. And so, a lot of the efforts that we do to dispel mis and disinformation typically as a political organization is at the doors with our volunteers. That was not something that could happen last year, but we can start to build that out now and moving into the midterms. And then the last piece for y'all is just advocating for reform, both at these organizations. There's a bunch of advocacy organizations there on the screen there. And then the last thing I'll say is Democrats have really done a good job at putting together proposals in the Congress that can address some of these problems. They have a possibility of kind of improving the situation as well. So with that, we'll open it up and kick it back to you, Simon.
Hey, thanks, Tim. I know this was a very brief overview. The couple questions I've got, and then we'll open it up to the broader audience. Can you talk a little bit about how big your staff is? You said you had researchers analyzing this stuff. I mean, where are you right now? Do you feel that you're sort of this network that you're describing of like-minded people at the party committees, the other big party committees, and then the state parties and the campaigns? Is there really a community yet that's operating, that's sharing information and giving each other heads up? Is what's been and then the final question that is just, are you working closely with the DCCC and the DSCC in the midterms?
Yeah, so great questions. One of the things that we have done and are continuing to do is have bi-monthly meetings with our sister committees where we talk about trends and talk about threats and challenges that each of them are facing. We used to do those in person. Now we're doing them over the phone, which is fine. And we also are in constant contact with our state parties, who are great resources, a lot closer to the ground. I think we get a lot of great information from our state party staff, and then also folks who are connected to the state parties. We have an inbox that we make available to them when they see mis and disinformation, out in the field or in their local communities, kind of bringing it to our attention, we can aggregate that information and then push it back out to everyone to get folks up to speed. Also give them kind of, the facts and talking points on how to diffuse some of this stuff. I'm sorry, I got to pull this back in front of my
Yep.
face. In terms of staffing, we have a bunch of analysts who, some of whom can focus on certain constituencies. And so we see a lot of Spanish language misinformation as an example. And so we have a researcher who focuses on that. We also see it in, Black community and in the AAPI community. AAPI community is a particular challenge because there are a lot of languages involved. So it's tough to kind of keep on top of that and have the resources to do that. But we're doing our best and working to kind of build out an apparatus to kind of push back on that, especially on apps like WhatsApp, which are private communication spaces that aren't open, places that we can see what's going on without having kind of folks on the ground there telling us what's happening there, and also in those communities able to kind of get facts and pushed into those spaces. So
next question, Tim. When you and I worked together back in 2018 at the DCCC, one of the things we learned was just how fast and they can light a fire, how quickly, because of the conditions, because what we found was that there were millions of Republicans, regular people, right, who got up every day, who were connected to this and that. When the fire was lit by one of those organizations that you mentioned, or a politician, in terms of this, the memes that are getting spread through the internet, they also had a lot of people who were amplifying all this. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference in the ecosystem between their world and our world, right? You talked about the Daily Wire, for example. I mean, we knew that Trump was often the one who was lighting the fire. I mean, they were very purposeful and conscious, right, of putting memes out in the morning to push them through the system. They don't have that anymore. Have you seen an uptick in the RNC? And what do you say to campaigns and candidates who look at that slide and say, my God, we're being overwhelmed on the internet. How do we compete in that environment, given how loud? Because I think what's really important about what you're describing is that I don't think people really understand how much further along their side is in creating a very integrated ecosystem for this as compared to ours, which is either behind or there hasn't been as purposeful an effort to do it yet, right?
yeah, if you don't mind, I'm gonna just share another slide here, and this is kind of a not beautiful slide. I apologize, but this is a snapshot of Twitter. I think it was just an average day last year. What we've done here is graphed Twitter accounts by the news sources that they share, and rank those news sources by their credibility and their political leaning. We didn't do these rankings. These are from a site called mediabiasfactcheck.com. But this is what the online media ecosystem looks like. You have a credible center left core, and you have a non-credible hard right core. And so the center right here, the Wall Street Journals and the bulwarks and the national reviews, that's not where the energy and the party on the right is. It's in these non-credible places like Gateway Pundit and Red State and Fox as well. And so first of all, there's a big gap between the left and the right in terms of the information sources here. But you also have an asymmetry, and I think that's something that gets lost a bit, and gets lost especially with some of the both sides coverage that we see in the mainstream press, is that we don't have two parties that are both equally based in reality and acting in good faith. There's a center left media ecosystem that Democrats and their voters live in, and there's kind of a hard right non-credible space where a lot of the energy on the right is, and you see that reflected in the politicians as well. They live in this media ecosystem, and when you see coordinated efforts like the attack on critical race theory, for example, which is complete mis and disinformation about what critical race theory is, how prominent it is in schools, what it teaches, etc. That's because, the media ecosystem on the right, like you mentioned, Simon, is radicalized and integrated so tightly, and you can see ideas come from the top, from the elite folks, and be pushed down, and then folks on the ground will go and search for evidence of these things, and they'll find cherry picked anecdotes that they can publish to social media, which then the elites will reflect back to their supporters as evidence of their lies being true. That this is exactly what happened with Stop the Steal. Donald Trump made the decision that he was going to run another massive disinformation campaign to undermine confidence in the 2020 election. He told his supporters that the election would be rigged. And then when they went to polls, when they went to polling places, they went and looked for and found, misunderstood in almost every case, found quote unquote evidence of the rigging, which they posted to social media, was boosted through a lot of these algorithms that get so much negative attention, and then picked up by these politicians and then reflected back to kind of solidify that narrative, so they can kind of create the narrative and then go find quote unquote evidence for it, produce it, and then create a truism, which is not based in reality. And I think we see that still in polls. Something like 40% of Republicans, or I think it's a majority of Republicans, don't think the 2020 election was free and fair, which of course it was.
Well, and Tim, one of the things I just, I give talks on this stuff, and one of the things I always say is that that the first step in countering disinformation is that we have to be louder, right? That we have to have more purpose around trying to not allow the other side to define the terms of these debates. And as you saw, we're not institutionally loud. And so there's this enormous burden on candidates that when they come into this space, they are at an incredible disadvantage. Every Republican has an army of internet warriors behind them that we simply just don't have, right, on our side. And so each individual campaign is beaming into this space. And it's really important that there is this sense that we have to go on offense all the time, that we have to get better at creating organic content. We have to get better at buying advertising in a targeted way on social media platforms, as much as that may cut against some of our own, sensibility. We've got to fight it out in this space. And I think that, as all of you know who watch this, there is this discussion in our party about whether or not social media is kind of for crazy people. And the thing is, as Tim was showing, I mean, this is a massive media operation. It's also very video driven, right? I mean, that YouTube is a much bigger actor in this space than people realize, and much of the content on Facebook that really moves is often video based, or at least has graphical images. And so, for politicians, this is a medium that works very well for them, right? They want direct contact with voters. It's the holy grail of our business to have disintermediated conversations between politicians and their supporters and their voters. And so I think that institutionally, Tim, one of the things I hope that your whole team and the extended communications team of the DNC can do is to really start helping all of us go on offense more. And one of the things we did in 2018, if those of you who followed the cycle, one of the big innovations of the DCCC that cycle were these 2 to 3 to 4 minute videos that all the candidates made that were internet specific. They had no connection to television, right? They were introductory videos. It was sort of a new media, a new genre in some ways of political communications that was really promoted very heavily by the committee itself. Not everybody did them, but these videos were key for people connecting to our candidates and then us raising large amounts of money online, because it was internet only, right? It wasn't a TV ad that was then dumped on the internet. And I think we've got a lot of learning to do in a party that's still where media, traditional television media consultants are still very powerful, to understand how different this kind of communication is. And it's even getting more different as millennials and Gen Z become a bigger part of the electorate. I mean, TikTok, which you didn't get into today, was, played a meaningful role in this last election and will become even more important going forward. And its idioms, its mechanisms of communication are different than other video stuff. So it's fascinating. I mean, I think that part of the part of what Tim is showing us is that man, do we have to do a better job here? And we've got to get louder on the internet, or we're going to be drowned, out by this avalanche of BS that comes across the internet every day. Okay, I'm done with my part. Let me go to some questions. I have a very practical question from Susan here, which I love, and I'm going to start with Susan. When I see disinformation on Twitter, I find a reliable source and respond with a quote from a trusted source. After doing that, I often get swarmed by many on Twitter to drown out my info. Do you have an idea of how to deal with swarms? It's a great, very practical question.
Yeah, and Susan, thank you for fighting the good fight off the top. Yeah, absolutely. When you see mis and disinformation, if you reply, you should, if you can, provide accurate information with a good source and let people know what the truth is behind whatever the false statement is. We want to always be um, empathetic and not insulting. If you want to be persuasive, it's important not to offend people when you're fact checking them. But you are going to get mostly negative reaction in those cases, and that's okay. A lot of people are going to take offense, but there's other people who are going to be watching those threads and watching those comments, and be moved by you and not comment, right? So it's important to keep doing that. If you are being harassed as a result of this, most companies do have tools to block and mute folks. If it's really egregious, there are reporting functions as well. Don't certainly don't accept harassment on these sites. There are tools and there are reporting mechanisms to kind of to work against those. And I know Simon has a fair amount of experience with some of this stuff as well.
Yeah, and I just will say that I'm a very aggressive blocker. I mean, I used to hate that because I wanted there to be free and open speech, but there's so many actors that are who are not there to have free and open speech. They're there to intimidate. They're there to harass. They're there to discourage you from being there. Right. That's the reason they're there. Right. Is to drown out our voices on the center left. And so, what I have found as somebody who maintains a pretty active Twitter feed, is that anybody who is coming after me that is not clearly a real person, I just block them. I mean, it's just almost automatic. But I do check every account. Like I don't block anybody without. And if it's a real person and it's clearly a real person, I don't usually block them, right? But I find that 95% of the negative comments I get, I think are not real accounts. And your judgment about what's a real account, not it's a little bit of a secret sauce, right? You have to make your own decision, but I think that usually my guideline on that is that if they're not making any major effort to explain who they are or where they live or have any kind of human aspect to the account, which is really what this medium is, then to me, that's a pretty big giveaway. I mean, if it's seen as a purely ideological account that's operating to advance ideology as opposed as a person with that ideology, right? I think when you start looking at it that way, you're going to start seeing it is shocking, I think, how many still inauthentic and fake accounts there are, despite all the efforts to clean all this stuff up.
One thing I should also mention, Susan, is at least on Twitter, they are experimenting with Birdwatch, which is a kind of crowdsourced fact checking effort. So far, it seems like they've made progress there. That may be something you want to sign up for, and your notes may be featured more prominently on the tweets as a fact check as part of that program. So that's an encouraging experiment that Twitter is doing. The only other thing I'd mention, just referencing that chart I showed at the top, more people are going to be on your Facebooks and your Instagrams and your YouTube. So it's also important to spend time there and make sure you're spreading the good word and getting facts out there to your networks on those sites, rather than just only spending time on Twitter.
Let me, hey, Zariah, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but let me go to Peter and Dan. I'm going to combine their questions because they're similar. Peter has, it seems you're mostly on the defensive. Is that so? Have you planned on taking the offensive, right, and emphasizing the cheating and signs of fascism that appear to be the Republican strategy? And then also Dan Ancona, who's been operating in this space for a long time, And curious, he writes, curious what Tim would like to see outside media groups and funders prioritize in their strategy. Feels to me like there are a ton of gaps, but which are the lowest hanging fruit, most urgent needs from the DNC's perspective?
Um, so I would say my team specifically is a bit more defensively focused. I don't want to leave the impression that the DNC as a whole is defensive focused. We have a lot of resources on communications and digital, on getting our message out and being as loud as possible, and building those networks, right, to make sure that um, our partners, our surrogates, our supporters are getting the message out as well. So I don't want to leave the impression that the DNC is defensive. I think my team is more defense oriented, with the goal of putting good intel in front of the folks who can go out and fight the fights, with a more offensive messaging. Um, the second question around, sorry, Simon, remind me
Sort of, it's yeah,
of the
sure.
donor piece, right?
Dan's involved in a big funder group, and
Mhm.
so what would you like to see outside media groups and funders prioritize in their strategy? Feels like to me there's a ton of gaps, but which are the lowest hanging fruit, most urgent needs from your perspective?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think I mentioned during the presentation that I think progressive media is a bit weaker than folks. It's quite a bit weaker than right wing media, and I don't think that we should replicate what they have there, because it's not based in truth, and I think it has been pretty catastrophic for the Republican Party, at least over the long term. That being said, there are opportunities to invest in progressive media. Spaces like YouTube, especially, are fairly devoid of center left voices. Um, and the other thing is, just traditional journalism, especially local journalism, has been really hollowed out by social media. And so, supporting those types of organizations to get to swing voters, regular folks who just turn to local news for information, I think is really important. And then obviously, we're here at the DNC, at different allied organizations, places like Media Matters do really good work, on the more on the defensive side. But those organizations are doing really good work to try to hold the right accountable for a lot of this mis and disinformation.
Hey, Dan, you and I should talk offline, but I will just tell you that one of the things you should consider is trying to fund new models of offensive engagement. And what I mean by that is, is finding the 20, first of all, I think the biggest distinction that I still don't think our family really understands is that traditional media is not something that can be amplified by individuals, right? And that this digital media we're in, this issue of regular people being conditioned and playing a major role in the amplification and moving around of messages is something that we've probably been more dismissive of as Democrats than encouraging, and creating a new culture around the notion that citizens have a real important role to play here. That this is not something that's going to be managed solely by the committees, but it has to be done in partnership. But the second thing I would say is, I really think that it's going to be critical for many of these 2022 campaigns to have 20 to 30 people back home who are volunteers on offense, right? Who are there as organizers, right? They're not donors, but they're people who are taking the narratives and stories coming from the campaigns and pushing them through their networks and starting to create this model of amplification, but done in an organized way. And they do it as themselves, right? Not as fake people, right? But as themselves. And that, creating new models around that, Dan, about how do we create offensive strategic amplification on various platforms that isn't propaganda, right? That it's actual citizens being clear that they're operating as a person, right? I mean, that's the key thing, is that, yes, I support Congressman Durigan, and I'm really proud of what he's doing, and I'm going to be, I'm part of a team that's making sure that his message is getting out every day. These are things that are just not really getting done, right, on a very fundamental level. And this hasn't become institutionalized yet. And I think there are things that can get done, and modeling of this kind of stuff, and even some research and studies and best practices that groups, Dan, that I think could help with. And so we just have to start with this notion that, and sort of the way that there are many in our family who are dismissive of Twitter, dismissive of social media. That whole attitude has got to end, and we got to go win the internet, not be arrogant and dismissive about it. And we're not winning the internet, and we should be, given that an overwhelming majority of young people who use all this stuff are Democrats, right? We have a, the urgency of us, many more of our voters are on the internet than their voters. And so there's also a demographic urgency of us having many more post-television people being Democrats than Republicans, right? And you wouldn't know that based on the numbers that Tim showed you earlier. I'm going to have some, Zariah, did you go? I was going to call on you. Zariah, a former Indianer who's currently working at Facebook, had raised her hand. And okay, never mind. She had to go. And but Zariah, I love you, girl. I hope you're well and fighting the good fight inside the big company over there at Facebook. Let me see if there's any other comments here. I think, Tim, let me just do this. We try to wrap by 1:40. Is there anything else you didn't cover? I mean, anything else that you want to get out there before you go, or anything you want to try to emphasize for everybody?
Yeah, so I guess I would just point folks to our scorecard on our website. Again, I can't stress enough like how the social media companies really hold the cards here, and like the incentives that they create on their sites really drive the behavior. And so, there's a reason why the hard right dominates Facebook. It's because of the way their systems are oriented to hold people's attention, to keep them, afraid and outraged. That content kind of moves to the top, and then those publishers are incentivized to create more of it, create more of this propaganda. And so it's really important that we like push on these companies to, as deliverers of news, to orient their systems to deliver accurate information and not just attention grabbing content. That goes to kind of the heart of why this ecosystem is so toxic in terms of the information quality.
Yeah, and let me just make two final comments, because I got a question that I just want to respond to. Is that Tim? So three things. First of all, Tim, thank you. Tim is a pioneer. I mean, he really is. He helped build the first countering disinformation operation ever in a major party committee. He then went into the DNC and is now in the process of building up something that, and is trying to create something that has never been done before. One of the things I think has been most important about what he's doing is that this cycle, he's very integrated in with the war room and the communications team. Because in the early days, there were questions, right, Tim, about, was this analytics? Was this a data thing? Where did this sit? Was this in the Bob Lord cyber world, right? And I think what's happening at the DNC is they're placing this now in the right place, which is, this is, as an old war room guy who helped invent the war room back in 1992, there really isn't a big difference between what Tim is doing and what we did in the war room in 1992. And I think there's been a big rethink about that that's actually been important. The second thing I want to say is that, to a friend who just wrote, like, if you're just a candidate, how do you think about this? I think one of the things we've tried to push is that there has to be a lot of this capacity put into the party committees and into the aggregators like the DLCC and the DSCC and the DCCC and the DNC, because this can be hard and complicated. And for small campaigns, they have to, at least initially, the communication staff that are there have to be taught how to think in this new way. And so to me, the most important thing is building up these kind of muscular operations like this, who can then teach all the candidates how to do this over time. And that funding is going to have to shift. The kind of people who are in the communications operation are going to have to change. I mean, we cannot be ignorant of this stuff. And as my friend who wrote this question knows, it will be very different for a Senate or gubernatorial campaign than a House or a state House campaign that have far more staff. And we should talk, Tim, maybe, and have some follow up on this about the way to think about staffing out at a campaign. But since these things often move across geographic realities, right, and there's sort of a national overlay, it's really critical that there is a national orientation on top, that everything in my view, that it has to be a collaboration between the campaigns and the party committees, but the party committee these individual campaigns can only do so much, and they need a lot of help here. And that's why what Tim is doing, the way he's pioneering this, we know the DCCC has continued to have a great team in place. This stuff really, really matters, because it does replicate across campaigns. You'll start to see the same thing. And so that ability to see patterns and to see things and to teach others how to do it is like, it's so important, right? And then the final thing I just want to close with is that, you know, we have a lot of work to do about learning how to go on offense, as I said earlier. And I think there was something else, Tim, I was going to bring up, but you know, these are kinds of conversations. Tim, by the way, is available to do talks to various organizations. He and I did a presentation at the state chairs meeting. I don't know, in New Mexico 2 years ago now, I guess that was, Tim.
Yeah.
That was really pre-COVID. That was really terrific. And I really feel that people got to ask a lot of questions, these kind of questions, right? These very granular, like, how do I do it kind of thing, right? And these kinds of sessions that Tim is great at, which is not really what we did today. We did something that was a little bit scaled down. You know, he can do these for state parties. He can do this for center-left organizations. He's, you know, you can rent him out, right, for an hour. And I would just encourage everybody to do it, because he's terrific in these settings and can get very brass tacky for everybody about how to deal with things like swarming, right? That question was a great question, Susan, right? Those are exactly the kind of things we have to learn how to get, you know, better at it, not be intimidated. And so it's, I'm just want to say, I'm really proud of Tim. You know, he was given an opportunity, the DCCC, to sort of create this thing, and he did an incredible job. And I think he's really changed American politics. And he's, you know, been one of my heroes in this business, frankly, for how he stuck with this. No, I'm serious. I mean, you've done something that is really, truly, no, it's truly important, and it's not yet adequately distributed through the family, right? And so what I wanted to give Tim some airtime today to become better known and to help get him out there more, so he can become an even more valuable resource to the family than he already is. And so, Tim, let me leave you then with some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity and everything you just said, and folks for jumping on. I am available definitely, you know, to talk, but also just if you have, you know, a quick question, you can shoot me an email. Like Simon, maybe we can just circulate that after the call. So happy to help out.
Okay, Tim, thanks everybody. The video of this will be online this afternoon. So if you want to direct anybody who thought it was helpful, you know, we can please, and then if you are involved in organizations that could host Tim and bring him to a broader audience, please be aggressive, right? I've seen him do it. He's terrific, and we need to get him out there. Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you.